Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
Today, we're embarking on an intensive deep dive into a book whose influence is, well, it's arguably one of the most significant cultural shifts of the last decade. Mark Manson's The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Feck.
Right, and that title alone, it just promises this radical rejection of the entire self-help industrial complex.
Everybody does.
For generations, the conventional self-help shelf has been, crammed with books all dedicated to achieving constant, unrelenting happiness. This high-level, perfect existence where every day is a sun-drenched affirmation.
And Manson just flips the script completely. He argues that this relentless, almost mandated search for only positive experiences is structurally designed to make you miserable.
It's counterproductive at its core.
The central question this book forces us to address isn't just a personal one, it's systemic. It's how does modern culture compel us to misallocate meaning, attention, and crucially, emotional responsibility?
I mean, if you break down where we spend our mental energy.
Exactly. We are essentially taught to care to give a fuck about an infinite number of superficial external things. And this process, it just drains our limited emotional resources, leaving us utterly exhausted and kind of rendering the things that genuinely matter meaningless.
And that's why this message is so critical right now. I mean, we are living in a constant state of forced comparison, and it's amplified by algorithms that feed us these highly curated, fictionalized lives.
The default cultural mantra is one of performative positivity, isn't it?
Oh, completely. You must be perfect and amazing and, as Manson puts it, crap out 12-carat gold nuggets before breakfast each morning.
And when you are constantly bombarded by the most optimized, filtered, and successful moments of hundreds of other people's lives, the 350 images of people totally happy, having phenomenal experiences, it creates a continuous structural anxiety.
Of course.
The vast, unbridgeable gap between the curated ideal we see online and the messy, average, disappointing reality of our own lives makes it, well, in his words, impossible to not feel like there's something fundamentally wrong with you.
So if you're listening and you feel like that anxiety is structural, that the deck is stacked against you feeling adequate, Manson is basically saying you're right. That feeling is produced by the system.
Precisely. And we should be clear up front. This deep dive is not merely about motivational advice or, quick life hacks. This is a systems-level analysis of values and incentives.
It's about the architecture.
Yes. We are examining the underlying architecture of modern Western society, particularly our hyper-connected, comparison-driven information economy that is specifically optimized to produce this specific type of existential anxiety. By questioning what we prioritize, we're analyzing the filtering system through which we perceive success, failure, and self-worth. It's a mechanism critique.
Okay, so let's unpack the messenger and the message itself. Mark Manson isn't your typical self-help guru, right? He's not selling you an inspirational morning smoothie recipe.
Not at all. He came up as a star blogger and a cultural commentator, and he's known for his blunt, often profane, non-traditional style. He leans heavily into uncomfortable truths.
He's the anti-self-help guy, which is why I think his message resonated so profoundly when it arrived.
The timing was everything.
Mm.
This book emerged around 2016, and it was following a decade dominated by intense hustle culture, positivity economics, and the just explosive growth of social media identity performance.
The incentives were all external.
They were screaming that external metrics were the only measure of worth. You must be smarter, richer, more envied, more popular, and, crucially, constantly optimized.
It created a societal paradox, didn't it? The culture promises universal happiness if you just try harder and want it enough.
That's the core irony Manson illuminates. The prevailing cultural promise of happiness structurally produces anxiety because by emphasizing the pursuit of perfection and external success, it constantly forces you to confront and emphasize what you lack.
If you were truly content, the pursuit wouldn't be necessary.
Exactly. And this brings us to a really fascinating counterpoint he makes regarding traditional self-affirmations. When you stand in front of the mirror and repeat, "I am beautiful, I am successful,"
You're doing two things at once.
you are. On the surface, you are attempting to feel better. But underneath, you are reinforcing the unconscious reality that you currently feel as though you are not beautiful or not successful already.
It's the constant focus on the deficit.
Right. If you were truly rich, you wouldn't need to dream constantly about being rich. As Manson quotes the old saying, "The smallest dog barks the loudest." Confident people don't need to convince anybody they're confident, they just act.
So if you're constantly performing confidence,
You are reinforcing the fact that you are insecure.
So, where does he ground his alternative thesis? He anchors it with the story of the poet and writer Charles Bukowski.
Ah, Bukowski, who was, by any traditional standard, a life failure for most of his existence. He was an alcoholic, a chronic gambler, a lout who worked these thankless jobs and suffered decades of rejection.
But he eventually found success and became a literary icon. The traditional self-help narrative would laud him for his persistence, right?
Of course. But Bukowski's own epitaph famously reads, "Don't try." And Manson argues that this phrase contains the entire philosophy of the book.
So what does that mean, don't try?
Bukowski's success didn't come from overcoming his flaws to become some shining winner. It came from accepting that he was a flawed man, a loser perhaps, and then writing completely unflinchingly honestly about those failings without any attempt at pretense or hesitation.
The genius was his comfort with himself as a failure. He just gave up on the impossible standard of perfection.
He did. So the book's thesis is crystal clear. A meaningful life is not created by avoiding suffering or trying to be flawless. It is created by consciously choosing which problems, struggles, and values deserve our limited attention and emotional responsibility.
It's all about selective care.
Exactly. You have a limited number of fucks to give in your lifetime, and if you waste them on trivial nonsense, you have nothing left for the important fights.
This idea of selective care leads directly into the core psychological paradox that traps so many of us in the modern era, which Manson terms the backwards law.
The backwards law is, it's the foundation of the whole philosophical architecture of the book. It states that the desire for more positive experience is itself a negative experience,
Okay, wait.
while the acceptance of negative experience is itself a positive experience.
That is a total mind bender the first time you read it. Can you break down the psychology of that paradox for us?
Sure. Think of it this way. If you desperately chase happiness, you are defining yourself as someone who is not currently happy. You're reinforcing your own dissatisfaction.
The pursuit reinforces the lack.
Precisely. If you desperately seek love and validation, you feel lonelier and more afraid because you are prioritizing the absence of what you want. Manson uses the analogy. The more you try to chase feeling better all the time, the less satisfied you become, because the chase itself acknowledges and strengthens that feeling of lack.
And the conventional fixation on positive expectations, the just believe in yourself culture, ironically strengthens that deficit.
It does. If you genuinely were confident, or wealthy, or irresistible, you wouldn't need constant external or internal validation. The very act of needing to try to be confident proves that you aren't.
Which brings us to a fundamental conclusion about suffering.
The avoidance of suffering is a form of suffering. The denial of failure is itself a profound failure. And these avoidance mechanisms are what create the dreaded feedback loop from hell.
Ah, the loop, where anxiety about anxiety or anger about anger becomes self-compounding. I think everyone listening has experienced this.
Oh, for sure. You get worried about how much you're worrying, and then you feel guilty about how guilty you're feeling,
Yeah.
which just spirals into this paralyzing state of neurotic self-loathing.
And what has made this psychological quirk so insidious in the last generation is the sheer volume of information and comparison available to us.
Absolutely. Previously, if you felt miserable, perhaps you just assumed, well, that's just life, I need to get back to work. There's a ceiling on comparison.
And now the ceiling is gone.
It's gone. We have an infinite amount of things we can now see or know, and an infinite number of ways we could discover that we don't measure up. If Grandpa felt like a cow turd, he just got back to shoveling hay.
Right.
Now, you feel like a cow turd, you open your phone, and you see 700 people doing yoga on mountaintops, while simultaneously running multi-million-dollar startups and raising perfect children. The loop becomes exponential. It leads to a neurotic self-hatred because we feel bad about feeling bad. It's a psychological epidemic.
So the radical counterintuitive solution to short-circuiting this entire destructive system is simply stop giving a fuck that you feel bad.
Just accept it.
You accept the bad feeling, you say, I feel like shit right now, and who gives a fuck?
That acceptance is the key. It stops the self-hatred for feeling bad. It breaks the loop. But, and this is a crucial clarification Manson makes, not giving a fuck is not the same as indifference.
Indifference is lame and scared.
Yes. Why does he see indifference as cowardly? Because indifferent people often pretend not to care about anything, but they actually care too much. They're terrified of the world, terrified of failure, and terrified of the repercussions of their choices.
So they hide.
They hide behind sarcasm, avoidance, and cynicism. They make zero meaningful choices because they don't want to risk rejection or loss. That isn't subtle art, that's just fear.
So true not giving a fuck is actually highly selective care. It's the willingness to reserve your limited energy, your fucks, for what genuinely aligns with your values.
Even if those choices make you an outcast or a pariah in the eyes of society.
It means reserving those limited resources for friends, family, purpose.
Or, yes, burritos. The person who reserves their emotional energy for the big hard things is the person who is truly resilient. They are willing to stare failure in the face and laugh because the failure isn't important, the commitment to the value is.
And if you find yourself constantly burning emotional fuel by giving too many fucks about minor, trivial annoyances, like a rude gas station attendant or that slightly insulting comment someone left on your social media post, it's a diagnostic signal.
It really is. It suggests a core, uncomfortable truth.
Yeah.
If you are that consumed by the trivial irritations of life, it likely means you don't have enough genuinely meaningful things going on in your life to give a legitimate fuck about.
The highly polished middle-class problems we often worry about.
They're often just side effects of not having struggles that are genuinely challenging and purposeful.
That distinction, the trivial versus the important struggle, forces us to confront the inevitable, which is suffering itself. Manson grounds this inevitability with the story of the Buddha.
Right. The Buddha was a prince whose father sought to create a perfect life for him, shielding him from all sickness, old age, and death. He had endless luxury, but he was profoundly dissatisfied.
So he ventures out.
He finally ventures out, sees the unavoidable pain of human existence, and realizes the ultimate truth. Pain and loss are not errors in the system. They are unavoidable, baked-in features of being human.
Suffering isn't a bug in the design, it's a feature. Manson argues it is biologically useful, and that nature actually prefers suffering as the primary agent for inspiring necessary change.
Well, think about what pain actually does. Physical pain, like stubbing your toe, is a feedback mechanism that tells you something is wrong and needs correction.
And psychological pain serves the same function.
The exact same function.
Right.
The pain of rejection, failure, or grief, it teaches us our limits, it guides our behavior, and it prevents us from making the same mistakes over and over. Manson contends that actively avoiding the necessary discomforts of life through denial or distraction ultimately disconnects us from reality.
And this is where the conventional mindset about problems goes wrong. People chase a life where problems end, but Manson says that problems don't end.
They just improve. The quality of your problems changes. Warren Buffett still has money problems, maybe figuring out how to allocate billions in capital, whereas the drunk hobo has money problems related to where his next meal is coming from.
Buffett just has better problems.
Exactly. So the goal isn't to eliminate struggle, but to upgrade the struggle. People who are genuinely happy do not have a problem-free life. They have better problems because joy, fulfillment, and meaning are not given freely. They are earned through the struggle of choosing and managing those problems.
So the crucial question for determining your quality of life is not what do you want to enjoy?
It's what pain, struggle, and sustained effort are you willing to endure?
That reframing is profound because it shifts our entire focus. Instead of dreaming about the victory, the shiny external reward, we have to learn to love the process and embrace the discomfort it entails.
Manson illustrates this perfectly with his own failed rock star fantasy. He would daydream about the glory, right? The cheering crowd, the fame. He wanted the reward.
But not the struggle.
He realized he was not in love with the actual struggle. The daily, isolating drudgery of practicing scales, the exhaustion of hauling 40 pounds of gear up 3 flights of stairs in the rain after a gig, and just weathering repeated failures and rejections.
He didn't want the rock star life. He wanted the idea of the rock star life.
He wanted the reward and not the struggle. And that choice of struggle is fundamentally determined by our values. If we adopt what Manson calls shitty values, those values generate poor, hardly solvable, and ultimately unsatisfying problems.
He identifies 4 common shitty values that he sees driving this structural unhappiness. The first one he names is pleasure. And this seems so counterintuitive to the entire self-help movement.
It does because it promises more pleasure. But pleasure is a false god. When pleasure becomes the primary goal, when we pursue constant immediate highs, whether through consumerism, drugs, or even superficial success, it triggers the hedonic treadmill and often leads directly to anxiety, depression, and addiction.
So pleasure is just an effect.
It's a side product of having good values, like fulfilling a purpose or achieving a challenging goal. It should never be the cause or the primary mission.
Second on his list is material success. We're taught to define our worth by our net worth, or the symbols we acquire.
And beyond the basic necessities, food, shelter, safety, the correlation between happiness and worldly material success quickly approaches zero. Once your basic needs are met, the pursuit of more wealth or status primarily fuels status anxiety and envy.
And we end up prioritizing symbols over behavior.
Exactly. We kill ourselves working overtime for essentially nothing meaningful, sacrificing integrity or compassion for the sake of status.
Okay, third is the value of always being right. This links back to our earlier point about certainty, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, humans are inherently inefficient, flawed, and constantly making poor assumptions. People who base their self-worth on being right prevent themselves from learning, taking on new perspectives, or empathizing.
If being wrong shatters your identity, you can't grow.
You can't. It's far more helpful and structurally better for one's life to adopt the value of intellectual humility. Assume you are ignorant and constantly learning, accepting that you will be wrong often.
And finally, the value that is most central to his critique of the whole self-help industry: staying positive.
This is a form of emotional avoidance. Denying negative emotions, which are a necessary component of emotional health, they're a feedback loop, is denial. And avoidance ultimately leads to deeper, more prolonged negative emotions and emotional dysfunction.
Sometimes life just sucks.
And the healthiest, most constructive thing you can do is admit it and accept the pain. Problems add meaning and importance. Ducking them creates a shallow, meaningless existence, even if it feels temporarily pleasant. The most meaningful moments of life, raising children, completing a marathon, launching a company, they often involve deep pain, struggle, and overcoming adversity.
So if we zoom out, we can analyze the system that actively promotes these shitty values and exploits our human psychological quirks. This environment is structurally optimized to make us care about everything, trivializing the things that truly matter.
We can map this system through its actors and incentives. The primary actors include, social platforms, the massive wellness industries, which, as Manson notes, are often predicated on peddling highs.
And the relentless productivity culture that equates output with worth.
And their incentives. They're perfectly aligned with the attention economy. Giving a fuck about more stuff is excellent for business because it keeps you consuming, comparing, and clicking.
If you were truly content with your average life, you wouldn't need to buy the next course, the next supplement, or watch the next video.
Exactly. And the system also operates relentlessly through comparison metrics. This phenomenon creates what Manson labels the tyranny of exceptionalism.
Right, because the modern information pipeline, the internet, it filters and broadcasts the absolute extremes of human experience: the best, the worst, the funniest, the scariest.
So we are conditioned to believe that exceptionalism is the new attainable normal.
But statistically, the vast majority of our lives are unextraordinary, indeed quite average. So this constant deluge of 99.999th percentile information fuels a collective, profound feeling of insecurity.
And that insecurity then drives people to overcompensate, primarily through entitlement. Entitlement, in Manson's definition, is the belief that you deserve good things or exceptional status without having earned the required struggle or responsibility to achieve them.
He illustrates this perfectly with the anecdote about Jimmy. Tell us about Jimmy.
So Jimmy was this fictional composite of many people Manson had encountered. A delusional, pot-smoking, self-aggrandizing entrepreneur who's constantly spinning these grand narratives of his imminent success while in reality his life was falling apart.
But he felt great about himself.
He felt good about himself 99.9% of the time, believing anyone who criticized his actions or questioned his plans was jealous or ignorant.
So his high self-regard wasn't a sign of genuine self-worth, but a shield of denial.
Exactly. That delusional self-confidence was the entitlement, and it functioned as a psychological high that prevented him from confronting his problems honestly. Entitlement, therefore, traps one in greater levels of denial.
Whereas a person with true, hard-won self-worth can look at themselves frankly.
They're capable of looking frankly at their own negative traits, saying, yes, I exaggerate my successes, or I am bad at managing money, and then taking concrete action to improve. Jimmy's entitlement meant he was structurally incapable of lasting change because he'd already convinced himself he was perfect.
We can see how these chosen values act as systemic filters on our own perception by looking at two famous examples of musicians who were fired from hugely successful bands. They both had very different internal metrics for success.
Right. First, you have Dave Mustaine, the original lead guitarist for Metallica. He was infamously kicked out of the band just before they became global superstars.
And he went on to found Megadeth, a massively successful band in its own right.
Massively successful, sold millions of albums. Yet his internal metric for success became entirely based on arbitrary comparison to Metallica.
He focused on the
Right.
gap.
Yes. Despite his tremendous success, he spent decades considering himself a failure because Metallica sold exponentially more records and achieved higher status. His crappy value success, defined by comparing himself to an external, unreachable peer, tortured him throughout his entire career. It transformed genuine achievement into internal torment.
Then we have Pete Best, the drummer fired from the Beatles just before they exploded onto the world stage.
Pete Best experienced an initial, deep depression, which is understandable. But in time, he learned to actively reprioritize his life. He eventually realized that the circumstances of his firing led him away from the chaos and pressure of international fame.
And towards something else.
It guided him toward meeting his wife and focusing on his family and stability. His new values, family, simplicity, and emotional stability, gave him better problems to solve. He found genuine, lasting happiness by giving up the struggle for glory.
This contrast powerfully illustrates Manson's point. It's not the external achievement that dictates well-being, it's the internal standard, the value by which you measure yourself.
One man let comparison define his reality. The other chose a controllable, intrinsic value. And the ability to change these internal filters and break free of the system's external demands hinges entirely on one of the most difficult concepts in the book: radical responsibility.
What does radical responsibility mean in this context?
It's the simple, sometimes painful realization that we individually are responsible for everything in our lives. Not necessarily at fault, but responsible for choosing how we interpret and respond to every event, regardless of the external circumstances.
We are responsible for our reactions.
Yes. And that sounds incredibly difficult to accept, especially when truly awful things happen to us.
For sure.
It is counterintuitive, which is why Manson brings up the story of the philosopher William James. James was plagued by health issues, constant failure, and deep depression in his early life, feeling utterly powerless.
So he decides to conduct an experiment.
He does. He wrote in his diary that he would spend 1 year believing he was 100% responsible for everything that happened to him, regardless of fault or external cause.
He chose responsibility as a value.
He did, and James referred to this radical choice as his rebirth. It unlocked his personal power, forced him to stop blaming outside forces, and eventually led to his monumental success as one of the most influential American thinkers.
We absolutely need to clarify that crucial distinction you mentioned. Being responsible for a problem is not the same as being at fault for it.
It's the most important distinction. Fault, as Manson explains, is past tense. It's the result of choices already made. Responsibility is present tense. It's the choice you are currently making about how to respond.
Like the example he gives, if a drunk driver hits your car.
The driver is at fault, but you are 100% responsible for choosing how to handle the resulting stress, filing the insurance claims, and dealing with your lingering fear of driving. You didn't cause the event, but you are responsible for your response to the event.
Or the baby on the doorstep.
Right. If you wake up and find an abandoned baby on your doorstep, you are certainly not at fault for its presence, but you are immediately 100% responsible for choosing what to do next.
And our culture, generally, loves taking responsibility for success. I earned that promotion, but hates taking responsibility for problems or misery.
Because that choice unlocks true growth. Manson emphasizes that nobody else is ever responsible for your unhappiness but you. He cites his own personal story of his cheating ex-girlfriend. While she was clearly at fault for her actions, he realized he was still 100% responsible for choosing how he saw the situation, how he reacted to his pain, and how he valued the experience moving forward.
By owning his misery instead of blaming her for it, he was finally able to move past it and grow.
Exactly. But if we look at the system, we see a heavy incentive to avoid this responsibility and lean into fault. This is where victimhood chic comes in.
Now, this is a complex societal mechanism, and we should report Manson's view on it impartially.
Right. His argument is that social media and the attention economy actively reward the public's sharing of injustices. This provides the sharer with a temporary psychological high and a powerful feeling of moral righteousness that he calls insidious and deeply addictive.
The system incentivizes the performance of victimhood.
That feeling of moral superiority and justified anger is a tremendous psychological reward. And the system rewards outrage because outrage drives engagement.
The market for outrage porn.
Yes, where small or mildly offensive things are found, exaggerated, generating massive public outrage, and then broadcast back to the consumer. He argues this cycle distracts everyone from confronting their own problems and addressing real, systemic, societal issues, because the pursuit of feeling offended, of being morally justified, becomes a form of self-indulgent, highly reinforced pleasure.
And this environment makes it incredibly difficult to foster crucial democratic values like honesty, critical self-reflection, and welcoming doubt.
If your identity and your social standing are built upon feeling righteous, questioning yourself is simply not an option. And when people resist radical responsibility, they often do so because of the human craving for certainty.
We want to believe our current reality, our past memories, and especially our self-definition are fixed, objective truths.
And Manson argues that this clinging to certainty is one of the biggest psychological traps. He hits us with the uncomfortable truth that our beliefs are malleable and our memories are horribly unreliable.
That sounds like a statement of radical skepticism, doesn't it?
It is, and he grounds it in concrete examples, like the false memory syndrome epidemic that emerged in the 1980s and 90s. This was a period where, often guided by certain therapeutic techniques, people began inventing detailed, vivid memories of childhood trauma or abuse.
And why did this happen?
Because the human mind needs coherence. If their present life felt miserable, their brain would unconsciously fudge the past to create a story where they were a victim of a past event. This provided an explanation for their present misery, and, most importantly, it let them avoid present responsibility for their choices.
It shows we are deeply biased toward maintaining the meaning our mind has already constructed.
Even if that meaning is entirely wrong or fabricated. And this fear of being wrong, of losing our self-narrative, leads to what he calls Manson's law of avoidance.
What's the law?
This law states that it is psychologically easier to sit in a painful certainty than to test that belief and risk failure. For example, it's easier to sit there and believe the painful certainty that nobody would find you attractive, so why bother trying to date or make friends, than it is to actually take the risk, ask someone out, and potentially face failure or rejection.
We cling to certainty because it's a moderate, predictable comfort now.
Even if it means mortgaging greater happiness later. We assume we already know how the story ends, so we don't try.
And that means certainty is the structural enemy of growth.
Entirely. Uncertainty, conversely, forces intellectual humility. It removes the harsh judgment of ourselves and others, making genuine learning and progress possible. The goal is not to find the one right answer, but rather to chip away at the ways we're wrong today so that we can be a little less wrong tomorrow.
The more we admit I do not know, the more opportunities we gain to learn and grow.
We're unconstrained by a fixed, brittle identity. And that leads directly to his metaphor for identity dissolution. Kill yourself.
Yeah.
Metaphorically, of course.
Of course.
Yes. Defining one's identity too narrowly traps us in a defensive role. If you've always defined yourself as the brilliant, driven CEO, giving up that career or admitting a major mistake feels like psychological harakiri. The more ordinary, simple, and honest our self-definition, giving up the need to be uniquely talented, spectacularly successful, or perfectly attractive, the less threatened we feel by failure.
And the more free we are to act, fail, and experiment. But this process of simplification and definition requires selective rejection.
Always. The act of choosing a valuable path requires rejecting alternative paths. To value depth in a relationship, a craft, or a career requires rejecting the superficial breadth of doing a little bit of everything.
And avoiding rejection makes us rudderless and meaningless.
Because you cannot be an important presence for some people without inevitably being an embarrassment, an outsider, or a failure to others. We have to be willing to say no to the unimportant things to say yes to the important things.
And this necessity of rejection is clearest in the domain of relationships and boundaries. Manson offers a strong critique of the toxic, codependent ideal of love often promoted in our culture, exemplified by stories like Romeo and Juliet.
Right. He argues that Romeo and Juliet isn't the ultimate romance. It's a story of two absolutely unhinged, codependent teenagers who use each other to escape their respective realities. It's an unhealthy form of love predicated on escaping individual responsibility.
So what does a healthy relationship look like in Manson's view?
Healthy love is based on two people acknowledging and addressing their own problems, with each other's support, but not for each other. Boundaries are the fundamental delineation of responsibility for one's own problems.
And the unhealthy dynamic.
Unhealthy relationships are based on two people trying to solve each other's problems. The classic victim and the savior dynamic, to feel good about themselves. The victim seeks validation by creating constant problems. The savior seeks worth by fixing those problems.
Both are conditional and self-sabotaging.
And unsustainable. The key ingredient for a healthy relationship, he insists, is trust, and trust requires conflict.
So what does that mean?
If you are going to commit to a partner and respect their individual journey, both partners must be willing and able to both say no and hear no. If refusing something, refusing to go out, refusing to agree with a decision, refusing to solve their emotional distress for them causes a complete meltdown or a blowout of drama, the relationship is conditional.
People with strong boundaries understand they cannot control how others feel.
Right, but they choose to support their partner in their individual growth and problem solving, regardless of the short-term emotional cost.
We've covered entitlement, faulty values, avoidance, and the craving for certainty. But if we follow Manson's logic to its ultimate conclusion, we circle back to the biggest, most certain problem of all: mortality.
This is where the book reaches its highest philosophical point, and is drawing heavily from Ernest Becker's Pulitzer Prize-winning The Denial of Death.
Okay.
Becker posited that humans' unique ability to conceptualize themselves, to know they are a self, leads inevitably to death terror. We're the only creatures aware of our own finite nature. This deep existential anxiety underlies all human behavior.
And to cope, we construct immortality projects.
Precisely. To deal with the fact that our physical body will die, we build conceptual self that attempts to live forever through these immortality projects. Our values, our legacies, our religions, our monuments, or even massive cultural systems. All civilization, Manson argues, is built on these desperate conceptual remnants.
We are driven to give way too many fucks about something because it distracts us.
It distracts us from the reality of our own physical death. The book offers the bitter antidote to this terror, which is to confront it head-on.
And he uses his own experiences for this.
He narrates his own life-changing experiences. The sudden, unexpected death of his close friend Josh, which forced him to stop avoiding what was painful and start living authentically. In his profound moment, standing on the cliff edge at the Cape of Good Hope, inches from a terrifying, fatal drop.
He describes that interface with death as euphoric and clarifying.
Because the immense, immediate fear of death is so potent that it focuses the mind instantly. It obliterates all the crappy, fragile, superficial values by forcing a moment of total surrender and clarity. Suddenly, the need to argue about trivial things, or the anxiety over being judged, becomes instantly irrelevant when faced with the absolute end.
That instant focus clarifies the only truly important question that remains.
It forces you to ask, what is your legacy? How will the world be different and better, even marginally, when you're gone? Death is the only certainty, and therefore it must be the compass by which we orient all other values.
If your values are not aligned with what you wish your legacy to be, you are fundamentally wasting your limited time.
When we choose values that are simple, immediate, controllable, and that stretch beyond merely serving the self, like helping others, being honest, or creating art, that is the basic root of lasting happiness. It's a fundamental rejection of the structural dynamics of modern life, which demand you chase highs and external metrics.
So what's the ultimate systemic insight here?
The ultimate systemic insight Manson provides is this: the pampering of the modern mind, the entitlement, the relentless positivity, the constant validation, has resulted in a population that feels deserving without earning and consistently confuses great external attention with great internal success.
But once you accept mortality, once you understand your own fragility, all the noise, the addictions, the entitlement, the fear of judgment becomes easier to ignore.
It does. It makes us, as he concludes, invincible in a sort of low-level spiritual way. Because what can the trivial world truly threaten once you've accepted the biggest, most terrifying truth of all?
This deep dive into the subtle art of not giving a feck ultimately provides a profound reorientation. It's not about being indifferent, it's about choosing what to care about.
Exactly.
It helps us see suffering and pain not as personal failures to be avoided at all costs, but as necessary guiding tools for growth. It moves us away from chasing external highs toward embracing the struggle that defines us.
The path to a good life, Manson contends, requires selective values. Values that are controllable, focused on process rather than outcome, and tolerant of chaos and uncertainty. These values lead us to better problems and provide a sense of meaning that lasts far longer than the fleeting, relentless optimism peddled by the comparison culture around us.
So, We leave you with the poignant, unresolved question raised by Bukowski, the unexpected philosopher of non-try. We are all going to die, every single one of us. Yet we are terrorized and flattened by life's trivialities. We are eaten up by nothing. How consciously are you choosing what those trivialities are in your own life, and what are you saving your limited stock of fucks for? This analysis was based on Mark Manson's influential book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Feck.
If you found these ideas valuable and thought-provoking, we encourage you to read the book yourself and support the author, or check your local library for free access.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.